He's now in full-time education. When he's not at the school, he's spending time with his uncle. This centre here, which is a centre, it's called the Hobik Centre. It's a centre for street children in Kisumu in Kenya. Reunited him with his uncle.
David Walliams is best known today as a successful children's author and entertainer, but his life did not begin in the spotlight. His early years were shaped by a mix of ordinary family circumstances and extraordinary personal struggles that would remain with him throughout his life. He was born David Edward Williams on August 20th, 1971, in Merton.
It's to make them funny because I think then kids are going to have a great time reading them, and there's nothing better. I mean, parents often say, how happy they were to see their kid enjoying a book.
A district in southwest London. His father, Peter, worked for London Transport, earning a modest income of around £8,000 a year. His mother, Kathleen, was employed as a laboratory technician in a hospital, bringing in about £5,200 annually. Together, they raised their family in Banstead, Surrey, in a small two-bedroom home that was valued at roughly £18,000 at the time. For many families in Britain during the early 1970s, this was a modest but respectable life. To most outsiders, there was nothing unusual about their household. Yet from a very young age, David showed signs of behaviors and emotions that set him apart. As a small child, around 4 years old, he would sometimes retreat to the bathroom and stay there for hours at a time. Inside, he amused himself by imitating voices he had heard on television. His mother later recalled that he could hold entire conversations with imaginary characters, switching effortlessly between accents and tones. While it seemed playful on the surface, it also reflected a need for escape and self-expression that hinted at a deeper struggle. Alongside his lively imagination, there were also signs of sadness and anxiety. Family members noticed that David appeared more withdrawn than other children, and he sometimes seemed weighed down by emotions he couldn't explain. By the time he reached primary school, it was clear that he was highly sensitive and easily affected by the way others treated him. At the age of 7, David joined the Sea Scouts, hoping it would help him fit in with other boys his age. Like many children, he wanted a sense of belonging, of being part of a group. However, this attempt to connect with his peers quickly turned into a painful experience. Within weeks, he was singled out for being different. His accent, which some children considered too posh, and his naturally dramatic way of speaking made him a target for bullying. Older boys picked on him, and the teasing turned into something more hostile. One summer, during a scout camp on Brownsea Island, the bullying escalated into something far more serious. One evening, David was discovered hanging from a tree by his scout neckerchief. The incident shocked the adults in charge, but it was brushed off as an accident at the time. Later, David would admit that it had not been an accident at all. At only 7 years old, he had tried to take his own life. His parents were told he had simply fallen, and the truth was hidden. For a child so young to reach that point revealed the depth of his unhappiness and confusion. This moment marked the beginning of a battle with his mental health that would last for decades. Despite the darkness he carried, David was also developing a deep love for comedy. By the time he was 10, he had collected nearly 50 comedy albums, spending his entire weekly allowance on them at charity shops. He memorized entire routines from legends such as Monty Python and Rowan Atkinson. His mother once found him in the early hours of the morning, performing a one-man comedy show to his own reflection in the mirror, dressed in her clothes. To him, laughter wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. It was a way of drowning out the darker thoughts that followed him everywhere. Around the same time, doctors prescribed him imipramine, an antidepressant that was rarely given to children in the early 1980s. The decision to medicate him reflected how serious his struggles had become, even at such a young age. David later described how he would wear headphones for hours each day, listening to music and comedy recordings, trying to shut out the negative voices in his mind. The headphones acted like armor, a way to separate himself from the sadness that often overwhelmed him. His school life also began to suffer. Within half a year, his grades dropped from top marks to near failing. Teachers noticed the change, but his focus had shifted. Instead of prioritizing academics, he devoted himself to comedy and performing, losing himself in characters and voices. He was already using humor as both a shield and a tool, long before it would become his career. In 1982, when David was 11 years old, he moved on to Reigate Grammar School, a step that should have provided new opportunities. Instead, it introduced more difficulties. Almost immediately, he was bullied again. Within the first term, the abuse became so severe that he ended up in hospital twice, once with a broken nose and another time after being locked in a cupboard for hours. His classmates gave him the nickname Coco, mocking the way he moved and spoke. These experiences left him feeling isolated and unwelcome. His physical health reflected the emotional toll. His weight dropped significantly, and teachers kept records of his frequent bruises. When asked about the injuries, David would often say he had fallen down the stairs. The truth was that he was being physically and emotionally abused by classmates who saw him as an outsider. The most humiliating incident came in 1984, when bullies forced him to perform comedy routines in the school toilets while they pelted him with wet toilet paper. Humor, which had always been his source of comfort, was turned against him. Despite this, he excelled in drama class. One of his teachers recorded that he had scored 98% for a one-man show about loneliness, a performance that showed how deeply he could channel his pain into art. That same year, at the age of 12, David attempted to take his life again. This time, the incident followed another encounter with the Sea Scouts. During a so-called swimming test, he was stripped and humiliated in front of others. When he returned home, he attempted to hang himself with his school tie. His mother discovered him unconscious, and an ambulance arrived at 7:43 in the evening. He had been unconscious for about 3 minutes before being revived. At the hospital, doctors placed him under psychiatric watch for 3 days. Medical notes from the time revealed that his thoughts were far more serious and advanced than what was usually seen in children his age. After this, his parents withdrew him from the Scouts permanently. But the impact of the incident stayed with him. For the rest of his life, he would rarely talk about that attempt in public. It was not until 2008 that he acknowledged it openly. By the time he was 13, David joined the National Youth Theatre, a step that should have been positive. Surrounded by young people who also loved acting, he hoped he might finally find acceptance. Instead, he felt even more alone. He struggled to connect with others and often described himself as an outsider. This was also when he met Matt Lucas, who would later become his longtime creative partner. Although they began a friendship, it did little at the time to ease the loneliness he carried. When David moved into his teenage years, the challenges of his childhood did not disappear. If anything, they became more pronounced. The environment at school, combined with his fragile mental health, shaped a period marked by both creative discovery and deep personal pain. In 1982, at the age of 11, David began attending Reigate Grammar School in Surrey. For many students, a grammar school education represented opportunity and stability. It promised academic challenge and access to resources that could open doors in the future. For David, though, it became another arena of struggle. Within weeks of starting, he found himself singled out again for being different. His manner of speaking, which other children thought sounded too posh, and his natural inclination toward drama and humor made him a target for bullying. The bullying quickly turned physical. By the end of his first term, he had already been hospitalized twice. One incident left him with a broken nose. In another, he was locked inside a cupboard for hours before being found. These episodes were not isolated. They reflected a pattern of hostility he endured throughout his school years. His classmates gave him the cruel nickname Coco, mocking what they saw as his odd way of moving and talking. The name stuck, reinforcing his role as an outsider. Teachers began to notice signs of distress. His weight dropped dramatically from 6 stone to just 4 stone and 8 pounds within a year. His English teacher kept notes about his frequent injuries, many of which David explained away by saying he had fallen down the stairs. These explanations did not match the reality of his situation, but they showed how unwilling he was to reveal the truth about the bullying he faced daily. The emotional toll of these experiences was significant. One of the most humiliating moments came in 1984, when bullies forced him to perform comedy routines in the school toilets. As he tried to act and entertain, other boys threw wet toilet paper at him. Comedy, which he had always used as a form of safety and self-expression, was twisted into another weapon to humiliate him. Despite these painful experiences, David's talent for drama and performance became increasingly visible. In class, he produced work that was far ahead of his peers. He once earned 98% for a one-man show about loneliness, a theme that reflected his inner world. While other subjects suffered, his creative abilities shone through. Teachers recognized his potential, even as they worried about his well-being. At the same time, his struggles with mental health escalated. In 1984, at just 12 years old, David made another attempt to take his life. This incident followed another troubling experience with the Sea Scouts. During what was described as a swimming test, he was stripped and humiliated in front of others. When he returned home, overwhelmed by shame and sadness, he attempted to hang himself with his school tie. His mother discovered him unconscious, and an ambulance was called at 7:43 in the evening. Records show he had been unconscious for about 3 minutes before being revived. Doctors placed him under psychiatric watch for 72 hours, noting that his suicidal thoughts were unusually serious for a child his age. This incident forced his parents to finally withdraw him from the Scouts. The organization had played a central role in some of his earliest traumas, and the decision to leave was necessary. But while removing him from that environment reduced one source of pain, it did not solve the underlying issue. David continued to carry feelings of isolation and despair. He rarely spoke about this attempt until much later in life, keeping it as one of his most private memories. As his teenage years progressed, David threw himself further into comedy and performance. By age 13, he joined the National Youth Theatre, an organization known for nurturing young talent across Britain. On the surface, this was a major step forward. Surrounded by other teenagers who loved acting and drama, he was part of a group that included many future stars. It was here that he first met Matt Lucas, who would go on to become his creative partner. But even in this environment, David did not feel a sense of belonging. While other students formed close friendships and seemed to thrive socially, David often felt like an outsider. He later described this period as one in which he kept pretending to be happy. But inside, he felt as though he was falling apart. Meeting Matt Lucas provided a connection that would prove important later. But at the time, even early friendships could not erase his sense of isolation. When he turned 16, another significant change took place. In order to pursue acting more seriously, he needed to join the Actors Union Equity. But when he tried to register, he discovered that another actor was already using the name David Walliams. Faced with this obstacle, he made a quick decision. He opened the phone book, pointed to a random entry, and chose the surname Walliams. From then on, David Edward Walliams became David Walliams. To his father, the decision was disappointing. Peter Walliams felt that his son was discarding the family name, something that had been a part of their identity. For David, though, the name change was less about ambition and more about escape. He later explained that adopting a new identity gave him a way to separate himself from the person he no longer wanted to be. It wasn't about chasing fame. It was about shedding a version of himself that felt too weighed down by sadness and rejection. The reaction at school was mixed. Some classmates thought it was strange and sudden, another sign that he was different. But David pressed on, continuing to use the new name as a way of reshaping who he was. It was, in many ways, an act of survival. By 1989, David was 18 and had finished school. He enrolled at the University of Bristol to study drama, a natural path given his love of performance. The move to university should have been a fresh start. Instead, it marked the beginning of another dark period. During the winter break of his first year, he returned home to Banstead. On Christmas, in his childhood bedroom, he overdosed on pills. His mother found him lying still and rushed him to hospital, terrified he had died. He survived, but the event had a lasting effect. For the first time, his parents fully realized how deep his struggles went. David later said it was his mother's love that saved him. Seeing her pain after the incident broke something inside him. He admitted he felt ashamed for putting her through that trauma, describing how she cried for weeks afterwards. This overdose was not just another incident in a long list of attempts. It was a turning point that forced his family to confront the seriousness of his condition. By the time David Walliams entered university in 1989, the foundations of his future career were already in place. But so were the struggles that had followed him since childhood. His teenage years had shown how performance gave him purpose, yet they also revealed how vulnerable he was to despair. The years that followed would continue to show this duality, outward success paired with an ongoing inner battle. At 18, David enrolled at the University of Bristol to study drama. The city, with its active theater and arts scene, offered new opportunities. He quickly found himself surrounded by other students who were as passionate about performance as he was. Among them were people who would later become well-known names in British comedy and drama. One of the groups he joined was a student comedy troupe, and it was through this that he met Simon Pegg, who would go on to international fame through series like Spaced and films such as Shaun of the Dead. University life should have been a chance for a fresh start, but even as he pursued acting and comedy, David's mental health remained unstable. In December 1989, during the Christmas break of his first year, he suffered another breakdown. At home in his childhood bedroom, he overdosed on pills. His mother found him lying still and unresponsive. She rushed him to the hospital, terrified she was about to lose her son. He survived, but the incident left a lasting scar. David later admitted that it was his mother's love that saved him that night. The overdose also made clear to his parents just how serious his struggles were, something they had not fully understood until then. Despite these episodes, David pushed forward with his studies and performances. At Bristol, he became known for his commitment to comedy and his ability to fully inhabit characters. In 1990, he joined a comedy group called David Icke and the Orphans of Jesus. The name alone was controversial, but the group was ambitious. Members included Simon Pegg and other future stars of British entertainment. Their shows mixed satire, absurdity, and sharp observational humor. On stage, David appeared confident and larger than life. Off stage, though, he often withdrew, describing himself later as someone who felt like the loneliest person in the world. His writing during this period shows how deeply conflicted he was. In private diaries, he described fantasies of stepping in front of a train, sometimes imagining the act in detail. These weren't passing thoughts. They were carefully considered, researched, and written down with clarity. Yet when he appeared before audiences, he seemed like an extrovert who lived for laughter. This contradiction between public performance and private despair would become one of the defining features of his life. In 1991, his friendship with Simon Pegg grew closer. Pegg later said that David seemed like someone born to entertain, always quick with a joke or a character. Yet Pegg, like many others at the time, had no idea how badly David was struggling in private. The ability to hide his pain behind humor had become second nature. The early 1990s also saw David take his first steps into the wider comedy scene. In 1992, he performed a solo comedy show at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, one of the most important platforms for up-and-coming comedians in Britain. The show, called Games Night, was well received. Reviews were positive, praising his energy and inventiveness. But behind the scenes, David was barely holding himself together. He later admitted that he suffered from daily panic attacks during the run of the show and lost over a stone in weight from stress. Still, he completed all 18 performances, demonstrating the resilience and determination that would characterize much of his career. The exposure from Edinburgh helped him secure an agent, marking a professional milestone. For many young performers, this would be the beginning of a steady climb toward success. For David, it was both a step forward and another mask to wear. He was gaining recognition in the comedy world, but his private battles were intensifying. By the mid-1990s, he had reconnected with Matt Lucas, whom he had first met years earlier at the National Youth Theatre. Together, they began experimenting with comedy sketches, eventually creating a show called Mash and Peas. Produced on a tight budget of about $8,000 per episode, it aired in the mid-1990s and ran for 9 episodes. The program was a parody of old children's television shows, mixing nostalgia with dark humor. Some of the sketches were considered so controversial that one, titled "I'm Black and Dad's in the Klan," was banned for being offensive. Despite this, the show gained a cult following and helped establish David and Matt as a creative duo to watch. Working with Lucas gave David both a professional partner and a sense of stability, but even this did not erase his private struggles. During filming, he sometimes disappeared without warning, leaving Lucas to improvise around his absence. While audiences were entertained by the sketches, David continued to wrestle with the same sadness that had haunted him since childhood. In 1999, the pair created another show, Rock Profile. The program featured David and Matt impersonating famous pop stars in exaggerated and absurd interviews. Their send-ups of celebrities such as Gary Barlow attracted attention, and the show became increasingly popular. Some stars even threatened legal action over the portrayals, but the controversy only added to its reputation. By the time the program aired a special episode in 2001, it had an audience of over 2 million viewers. David also began appearing in other television productions. In 2001, he had a memorable role in the series Spaced, created by Simon Pegg and Jessica Stevenson. David played Vulva, an eccentric and androgynous artist whose surreal performances were both bizarre and unsettling. Though the character appeared only briefly, the role left an impression. David poured genuine emotion into Vulva, and many saw the character as an early example of how he blended comedy with vulnerability. In 2002, he starred in the BBC film Cruise of the Gods, playing a fan obsessed with a fictional science fiction show. To prepare, he attended real fan conventions, observing how devotion could blur the line between admiration and obsession. In one scene, his character experiences a complete breakdown, delivering a monologue that was both funny and heartbreaking. Critics noted that his performance revealed emotional depth beyond comedy. Throughout these years, David's career trajectory was clearly rising. He had built connections with talented performers, developed a reputation for unique characters, and begun establishing himself on both television and stage. Yet the darker side of his life never truly disappeared. He continued to suffer from episodes of depression and described himself as constantly searching for ways to hide it. In August 2000, he and Matt Lucas launched Little Britain as a radio program on BBC Radio 4. It aired late at night, at 11 p.m., but quickly gained a devoted audience. The show introduced surreal characters like Vicky Pollard and Marjorie Dawes, blending absurd comedy with sharp social commentary. Though it only ran for 9 episodes on radio, the buzz it created set the stage for its transition to television. By the early 2000s, David Walliams' career had moved from small comedy clubs and university shows to the mainstream. He and Matt Lucas had established themselves with radio and television projects, but nothing compared to what came next. Their partnership was about to produce one of the most successful and controversial comedy programs of its time, a show that would make Walliams a household name, while also creating debate about where the line between humor and offense should be drawn. In August 2000, Little Britain began as a radio series on BBC Radio 4. It was broadcast late at night and ran for just 9 episodes, but it made a strong impression. The program introduced characters that were unlike anything else on radio at the time. Over the top, surreal, and often uncomfortable. People who listened found themselves both laughing and shocked. The early buzz around Little Britain convinced producers that it had the potential to work on television. 3 years later, in 2003, Little Britain premiered on BBC Three. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The first episode drew 1.8 million viewers, a record for the channel. The sketches featured Walliams and Lucas in elaborate costumes, wigs, and makeup, portraying exaggerated characters that satirized British society. Walliams became especially well known for Emily Howard, a man who dressed in Victorian women's clothing and repeatedly insisted, "I'm a lady," despite the obvious disguise. The absurdity of the character made it memorable, and audiences repeated the catchphrase across the country. As the show grew, so did its reach. By 2005, Little Britain had moved to BBC One, the largest platform in the country. At its peak, the program attracted 9.5 million viewers per episode, meaning that nearly 4 out of every 10 people watching television in Britain were tuned in. The show also made millions in DVD sales and merchandise, generating an estimated £25 million over its run. Walliams had gone from niche comedy to one of the biggest stars on British television. But the success came with controversy. Some sketches, such as Harvey Pincher, in which Walliams played an adult man who cried out for breast milk while dressed as a baby, drew strong criticism. Parent groups and religious leaders called for the sketch to be taken off the air, and in some countries, the episode was banned entirely. Yet the very controversy often made the show more popular. People wanted to see for themselves what others were talking about, and sales of related merchandise only increased. In 2005 and 2006, Walliams and Lucas took Little Britain on a nationwide live tour. It became the longest-running comedy tour in UK history, with 201 performances in front of nearly 800,000 people. The tour earned over £25 million, selling out venues months in advance. On stage, Walliams thrived. He transformed into the characters audiences loved, performing night after night, sometimes in grueling schedules. But privately, his mental health continued to deteriorate. Earlier in 2003, before the tour, Walliams had tried to end his life. On New Year's Day, he cut his wrists and throat with a kitchen knife. Later that same year, after a painful breakup, he attempted to hang himself. In his diary, he wrote that he didn't truly want to die, but he also didn't want to live. Despite this, he continued to perform, hiding his despair behind the characters. Even when staying at the Priory Clinic, a well-known treatment center for depression, he carried on with shows. For the public, he was a comedian at the height of his powers. For his family and close friends, he was someone barely surviving. In 2008, Little Britain crossed into America. HBO produced a US version called Little Britain USA, which ran for just 6 episodes. The show was nominated for 2 Emmy Awards, but it struggled with audiences. Many viewers found the humor offensive, and critics accused the program of relying on stereotypes, including blackface. The backlash was stronger than it had been in Britain, and the series was cancelled. Though the show had already won awards in the UK, the American version marked the beginning of a decline. Comedy was changing, and Walliams' brand of humor no longer fit the times as comfortably as it once had. By 2012, Walliams reinvented himself as a judge on Britain's Got Talent, sitting alongside Simon Cowell, Amanda Holden, and Alicia Dixon. His presence brought a new dynamic to the show. He was warm, emotional, and often funny, balancing Cowell's sharp critiques. Viewership soared, with the 2015 finale drawing 12.75 million people. Walliams became known for pressing the golden buzzer, often moved to tears by heartfelt performances. This role introduced him to an even broader audience, cementing his status as a national figure. Outside of comedy and television, Walliams pursued personal challenges that reflected both his ambition and his ongoing struggles. In July 2006, he swam across the English Channel, a 21-mile journey that took him 10 hours and 34 minutes. The swim raised nearly £1 million for sport relief, but Walliams later admitted it wasn't just about charity. Training and enduring the pain gave him a way to manage his sadness. He described the swim as a form of redemption, pushing his body to the limit while trying to escape his thoughts. He repeated this kind of endurance challenge in 2011, swimming 140 miles along the River Thames. This time, the experience nearly killed him. The polluted water made him violently ill, leading to fever, vomiting, and an infection known as Thames tummy. Some swimmers who contracted the same illness ended up on life support. Walliams pushed through and finished the swim, raising another £1 million. But he suffered long-term health consequences, later requiring emergency back surgery. Alongside television and charity, Walliams launched a new career as a children's author. In October 2008, he published his first book, The Boy in the Dress. The story followed a boy named Dennis who enjoyed wearing girls' clothes. The book caused controversy, with some parents accusing it of promoting transgender ideas. In 2017, calls were made in Australia to remove it from supermarket shelves. But the book was also celebrated for encouraging understanding and empathy. It was adapted into a BBC film in 2014 and later into a Royal Shakespeare Company musical in 2019. The success of his first book was only the beginning. In 2011, Walliams released Gangsta Granny, a story inspired by the death of his father, Peter, who had passed away from liver cancer in 2007. The book explored themes of family, loss, and love through the story of a grandmother who secretly lived as a jewel thief. It became a hit, adapted into a television special and later a sequel in 2022. Over time, Walliams' children's books sold more than 50 million copies worldwide, translated into more than 50 languages. His writing established him as one of the most successful authors for young readers in Britain. By the late 2010s, David Walliams had established himself as a versatile figure in British entertainment. He was a best-selling author of children's books, a popular judge on Britain's Got Talent, and a recognized face in comedy and television. But just as his career seemed stable, a series of events would shake the foundations of his public image. The final stretch of his story so far shows how fame, scandal, and personal struggles collided, leaving him with both setbacks and new beginnings. In 2015, Walliams was already balancing multiple roles. On Britain's Got Talent, he had become known for his humor and warmth, often moved to tears by emotional performances. Audiences saw him as a family-friendly personality who complemented Simon Cowell's bluntness with a more compassionate style. His reactions went viral online, and his presence helped boost the show's viewership to record highs. That same year, he also appeared in a BBC adaptation of Agatha Christie's Partners in Crime, playing Tommy Beresford opposite Jessica Raine. Although reviews were mixed, the role demonstrated that he could act beyond comedy. But his television projects outside of Britain's Got Talent struggled to find lasting success. In 2016, he launched Walliams and Friend, a sketch comedy series that began with a Christmas special. It attracted nearly 6 million viewers initially, but declined sharply to just over 2 million within weeks. Critics described it as clever, but inconsistent, and after one season, the program was canceled. This reflected a broader challenge he faced. Comedy tastes were changing, and the style of humor that had once made him famous was no longer connecting with audiences in the same way. At the same time, Walliams' children's books were thriving. Stories like Gangsta Granny, Rat Burger, and The World's Worst Children became staples in schools and homes. By 2022, his total book sales had surpassed 50 million copies worldwide, with translations in more than 50 languages. Gangsta Granny alone sold over 1 million copies, cementing his place as one of Britain's most successful children's authors. His books combined humor with themes of family, friendship, and resilience, often inspired by his own experiences. Writing had become more than just a career. It was also a form of therapy, a way for him to transform personal pain into stories that could entertain and comfort young readers. While his professional life seemed strong in certain areas, his personal life was still unstable. His marriage to Laura Stone had ended in a painful divorce in 2015, leaving him with ongoing struggles over custody and finances. The loss of his father in 2007 continued to affect him, shaping the emotional themes of his writing. And throughout, his long history of depression and suicidal thoughts did not go away. Even in moments of success, he often admitted to feeling weighed down by sadness. In 2020, Walliams' career took a sudden turn. During breaks in filming for Britain's Got Talent, he made crude and offensive remarks about contestants, believing his microphone was off. Among other things, he described one woman in sexually graphic terms and referred to an older contestant with a derogatory word. The comments were private and never intended to be broadcast, but they were recorded. For 2 years, the recordings remained behind the scenes. Then, in November 2022, transcripts of his remarks were leaked to the press. The leak caused an immediate scandal. Walliams apologized, saying the conversations were private and never meant for the public. But the damage was done. After a decade as a judge, his time on Britain's Got Talent ended abruptly. Fremantle, the production company behind the show, withdrew a reported $1 million contract for the 2023 season. Bruno Tonioli, a longtime judge on Strictly Come Dancing, replaced him on the panel. The fallout went far beyond the show itself. Walliams' reputation as a children's author and family-friendly entertainer was badly damaged. Parents who once trusted him as a writer were confronted with comments that seemed completely at odds with the image he had built. Television networks distanced themselves, and several projects in development were canceled. According to court documents, he lost an estimated $1.7 million in planned work. A stage show adaptation of one of his books was dropped, and a planned podcast with Matt Lucas was shelved. For someone who had spent years cultivating an image of warmth and humor, the contrast was striking. In September 2023, Walliams filed a lawsuit against Fremantle in the High Court, arguing that his private conversations had been recorded without his knowledge. He claimed that his microphone had been left on throughout filming days, capturing not just professional comments, but also personal reflections about his family, his marriage, and his mental health. The case revealed that Fremantle had stored recordings spanning nearly a decade, from 2012 to 2022. Walliams said the release of the transcripts had caused serious harm to his mental health and financial stability. In November 2023, the case was settled privately. Fremantle apologized and promised to treat future performers with more respect regarding privacy. While the settlement gave Walliams some measure of relief, it did not repair the public damage. His reputation remained fractured, and many broadcasters were unwilling to take the risk of working with him. The consequences were immediate and severe. A Channel 4 project set in India was canceled. Plans for live stage tours based on his books were abandoned. Book events that once drew large crowds became quieter. For the first time in more than a decade, his career seemed to stall. His identity as a safe, family-friendly figure had been shattered, and rebuilding it would not be easy. Despite these challenges, Walliams did not stop writing. In 2024, he released new titles, including the David Walliams Annual 2025, and his sales continued to grow globally. By then, his books had crossed the 50 million mark in worldwide sales. In India, they became particularly popular, with 37 million copies sold across the country. In January 2025, he embarked on a promotional tour there, showing that his literary career remained strong even as his television presence diminished. In November 2024, Walliams also opened up again about his lifelong struggles with mental health. He described in detail the moment in 1989 when his mother found him unconscious after an overdose, recalling her tears and his shame at causing her so much pain. He spoke about his constant fears, from fear of life to fear of love, and emphasized the importance of recognizing that mental illness often hides behind a smile. His candor reminded people that behind the scandals and headlines was someone who had been fighting an invisible battle for most of his life. At the same time, he began to rebuild his partnership with Matt Lucas. In December 2024, the two announced they were working on a new podcast called Making a Scene, scheduled for release in early 2025. Unlike their earlier work, the podcast would feature them as themselves rather than in exaggerated characters. Lucas described the project as edgy but mindful of modern audiences, promising humor that acknowledged how times had changed. The pair also held talks with Netflix about new projects, again focusing on fresh ideas rather than reviving Little Britain. This period marked a shift in Walliams' career. While his days as a primetime television judge seemed to be over, his writing continued to connect with readers, and his partnership with Lucas gave him a chance to explore comedy in a new form. The scandal of 2022 remained a defining moment, but it did not erase the rest of his work. Instead, it forced him to reconsider his place in the entertainment world and adapt to a different landscape. The story of David Walliams in recent years reflects the complexity of his entire life. He achieved extraordinary success in multiple fields, from comedy and television to literature. He raised millions for charity through endurance challenges, entertained millions on stage and screen, and became one of the most read authors for children in the UK. Yet he also carried a lifelong struggle with depression and made mistakes that cost him dearly. The contrast between the man people thought they knew and the man revealed through private recordings was stark. But even after scandal, he continued to write, perform, and seek new outlets for creativity. His resilience lay not in avoiding failure, but in finding ways to continue after it. For Walliams, writing remained more than a career. It was a way to survive, to process the darkness that had followed him since childhood, and to reach out to others in the process.